Jesus said, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I hold the keys of hell and death. Because I live, you shall live also. Friends, we have gathered the life of Mert Hansen. We come together in grief, acknowledging our human loss. May God search our hearts, that in pain we may find comfort, that in sorrow we may find hope, that in death we may find resurrection. Dying, Christ destroyed our death. Rising, Christ restored our life. Here now, dear friends, we are God's children. What we shall be has not yet been fully revealed. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Let us pray. Eternal God, we bless you for the great company of those who have kept the faith, finished their race, and who now rest from their labors. We praise you for those dear to us, whom we name in our hearts before you now. Especially we thank you for Mert and for Jean Hansen, whom you have now received into your presence. Help us to believe where we have not seen, trusting you to lead us through our years. Bring us at last with all of your saints into the joy of your home. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. I would invite you to rise as we sing together number 525. Hear out again, Lord. may be seated.
Sorry.
Our Psalter reading this afternoon is the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Our first Old Testament reading comes from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 1 through 14. The prophet speaks. The hand of the Lord came upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, and he set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. He led me around them. There were very many lying in the valley, and they were very dry. And he said to me, O mortal, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord God, you know. And then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will lay sinews upon you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. And so I prophesied as I had been commanded, and as I prophesied, suddenly there was a noise, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and there were sinews upon them, and flesh had come upon them, and skin had covered them, and yet there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, mortal, and say to the breath, Thus says the Lord God, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. And I prophesied as he had commanded me. And the breath came into them, and they lived, and they stood on their feet, a vast multitude. And he said to me, Mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are cut off completely. Therefore prophesy, and say to them, Thus says the Lord God, I am going to open up your graves, and bring you up from your graves, O my people. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from your graves, O my people. I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you on your own soil, and then you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken and will act. Thus says the Lord. Here ends the reading of God's word.
Hi, everyone. This is kind of becoming a monthly occurrence. I know we have it scheduled next month. Not okay. We have nothing scheduled next month, so we'll have that off. You can clear your calendars. So good afternoon, and it is something we just did a couple of weeks ago, and it's very fresh in my mind what happened. But you know, it is one of those things that happens, and you know, it is time to move on. But I wanted to share a few things with you. about my dad and his life and what he meant to me and our family and maybe the community and just kind of move from there. So, later in my remarks, I'm going to hit on a couple of things. One thing to keep in mind was that the first song that we sang, that was important, and I think in the way he lived his life, that I really wanted that in there, so I requested that specifically. And Bill also asked, is there any scripture, that you particularly like? And I said, yeah, I really want you to do Ezekiel. And he goes, why was that one of your dad's favorite passages? And I said, no, I hated it. He just absolutely hated it. So there is a method my dad does. It's not just the last defiant act of, of this child, getting back at him. So we'll get there, trust me. To start, I kind of like to explore that question, just who was Mert Hansen. And I know he's something different to all of us. And he was obviously a special guy, or he wouldn't have been here. And he certainly was to us. But, he was born in 1921 in Steele County, Minnesota, down in southern Minnesota, out in the rural area, and it was the Roaring 20s. I'm not sure, we have a lot of relatives here from Blooming. I'm not sure how roaring it was in Blooming at that time, but it was the Roaring 20s. So we started out with a good start, but within 9 years, we found ourselves in the Great Depression, and that's really, I think, what molded him and his generation, and the way they coped with life and the way that they dealt with things. So he moved on to that. He had an awful lot of interesting sides to him, and first of all, I'm sure this will come as a shock to me. He loved to tell stories. He absolutely loved to tell stories. But he actually liked to listen to them too, so he loved a good story, whether he was telling it or somebody else. He loved kids. He was absolutely a kid magnet. He couldn't go anywhere. When I was growing up as a kid, there were always little kids in our yard, just following him around, doing whatever he could do. He loved it at church. He loved being a part of Logos and watching the kids grow and mature, and he just loved them. And you go to a restaurant, and if there was a little kid in there, he'd make eye contact with him pretty quick, and you have that kid just doing all sorts of fun things that their parents couldn't figure out why he's rubbing this in his hair and all that. But he just loved doing that, and we just had that special connection, and it was just great because we had that ourselves. He was competitive. He loved to win. I think. Whenever we run races as a kid, I never won. He never let me win. I say, you love it, parents let the kids win. And he goes, no, not till you can beat me, that's when you win. Another thing that he had that some of you may not know about, he apparently was a really good poker player. That's something that skipped a generation with me. I'm not good at that at all now. Unfortunately, I have a son that maybe picked that gene up because he seems to be the one carrying that on. But he was actually pretty good, and the way I found out about it was he was hosting a group of his squadron mates. They were kind of having like a little impromptu get-together. A number of them could get together. It wasn't the whole group, but quite a number of them. And I was probably about 12 or 13, and he said, I want you here. I want you to meet every single one of them, and then you're leaving. And he says, you have things to do this afternoon. I said, okay, and I didn't have to ask why. I'm sure they were going to tell stories and swap lines, and I'm sure there were things I wasn't supposed to hear and know about. But so I greeted each one of them as they came in, and we said our niceties and this and that. And when we got to the last one, I said, hi, how you doing? And introduced myself, and the dad said, now he has to go. And as I was starting to walk away, one of them said, hey. He said, you ever play cards with the old man? I said, no. He goes, don't. So I had to ask him later what that meant. I didn't have enough time to do that right then. So I asked him a couple days later, and I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, he says, we had a lot of downtime, and in between the excitement, and he says, we played a lot of cards, and he says, I was actually pretty good at it. And so I took him at his word, and I didn't have anything to say that he wasn't, but, he didn't really elaborate on it too much. And it was probably a couple months later, and we were going through some old things, and I remember pulling something out of a box, and it looked like an envelope, a cloth envelope with string or, belt attached to it. What the heck is this? He goes, well, it's a money belt. And I goes, what do you need a money belt for? He goes, well, I don't use it anymore. And I said, well, when did you use it? He goes, well, I used it when I was in the service. He says, I used to keep my money in that. And I said, well, why? And he goes, well, I never went anywhere without $1,000 on me. I'm sitting there thinking, and you do the math, and $1,000 in the 1940s equates to over $12,000 right now. So I'm initially thinking, okay, he goes up to depression, losing banks, he just didn't trust the banking system, so that must have been, you had to keep in mind there. But I still asked him, I still wanted to know for sure. I said, so why did you keep $1,000 on you? He goes, never knew when a poker game was going to break out. So, whether he was good at it, I don't know, but apparently he took it very seriously at that time. So that was something that I learned about him along the way. And another thing is, y'all weren't there when I was growing up, most of you, especially not in some of the intimate moments when we had our septues. But, one question is, what kind of disciplinarian was he when you were growing up, and how did he treat you? And, he had high expectations for my sister and I, and he would tell us, but he you did what he told you to do, and if he told you not to do something, you didn't do that, because there was consequences if you didn't. But the thing about it was there wasn't a long list, so he didn't have, this checklist of life that you have to follow all these steps that I'm prescribing for you. There were just some basic tenets, and as long as you follow those, you're okay. When I didn't, there were consequences. And when I was younger, my folks, like most of the parents in the neighborhood, you got spanked if something went wrong. And but while some of the other parents, on the block, used a belt and used a tree limb or whatever, my dad never used anything but an open hand on the hind end, and it was very controlled. It wasn't necessarily there, to inflict pain, but it was there to send a message. And Mom was a little different. You had to watch out for her because whatever she had in her hand, she used. It was a hairbrush, that's what it was. It was a wooden spoon. And she had a quick temper, but it would, but what I learned was that you could get away from her long enough, you still got the spanking, but it just didn't have quite the intensity. She calmed down pretty quick. And her favorite tool with me was the yardstick, and it wasn't because it would inflict more pain, it was that she could keep up with me. It gave her an extra 3 feet of distance, because I was a runner. I didn't sit there. And I got another incident that might give you a little insight in the way my dad and I interacted and the way we connected, over time. Sometimes, he did like to talk a lot, but sometimes we actually didn't have to say a lot to get along. And there was one night I remember, he came home from work and they had a yard, it was about an acre in size, and he mowed it with a push mower. So he went out, and the big part of it was the backyard. So he mowed the backyard before dinner. And then we stopped for dinner, and then afterwards he went out to mow the front yard. By that time, all the kids in the neighborhood weren't playing ball anymore. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old, and so they were off, getting ready for bed, I guess. So and we had nothing good on TV. I mean, imagine that with 3 whole channels to look at. But I didn't have anything else to do, so on the front porch I just watched him mow the yard. And it was that golden hour, when the photographers just love, when everything is just enhanced with that glow before the sun really goes down. And it was just a really peaceful time. And so I was just sitting there watching, and he got done, he kind of pushed the mower off onto the sidewalk and just came over and joined me. He sat down, and all of a sudden, with all the mower going and stuff, all of a sudden it was just still in the neighborhood. And so he just kind of sat there, he lit up his pipe, and he's kind of gazing off into the distance, and I'm just kind of doing the same thing, kind of just vegging out. And then next door they broke the silence, and the screen door slams, and the kid comes running out, and he's screaming, and then the door slams, and his dad's behind him, and he's screaming at him, and finally got to a crescendo, and he says, I've had enough of you, you go get me something to beat you with. And so the kid went over to the bushes, that separated our 2 houses, and he broke off the branch, and he came back with about an 8-inch twig. And his dad looked at him, and then he really lost it. He said, no, you get me something big enough to beat you with. He says, if you don't bring me back something I can use, I'm using my belt. So the kid goes back, and this time he gets about a 3-foot switch, and he comes back, and he gets it across the legs. He's crying, his dad sends him to bed, and they go inside, and then it's quiet again. And my dad looked at me, and he goes, are you even looking at me, actually? He just kept looking off into the distance, and he just said, you know I'd never say that and do that to you, don't you? I go, yeah. He goes, you know why, don't you? I go, yeah. You'd never give me that much of a head start. And he never took his pipe out of his teeth. He said, that's right. So we had an understanding. Try to think here what I want to get into next. When we were growing up, a lot of his later life, and he got a lot of publicity over, a kind of a miraculous thing. We got Duncan Cameron here today. He's going to say a few words too, but Duncan actually found the plane that Dad flew in World War II, the actual plane, restored it, got him involved in it. It really brought back a lot of cool memories for him, and we really thank Duncan for that. That was made it very special for them the last few years they were alive. And he, and when we were kids, he would talk about World War II and things, but it was always the funny and the silly things. He never talked about combat. He always talked about, when he could, get a new recruit out in the middle of winter and fly around until they peeked into their shanty mask and had to peel it off and put it back, or, maybe even mess their pants because they were a little scared of what he was doing. So he thought that was great. He would tell us those stories. They usually come up and start when you see clouds up in the sky. And you start thinking about, it used to be so fun to fly around a formation like that, and we used to do this, and if you kept him going, you could learn a few more things each time. But he never really got into the nitty-gritty when we were kids. In fact, he has an album of his that, his Marine Corps album, and I wasn't even allowed to look at it until I was like 17 or 18 years old. It's pretty graphic, and it was things that he didn't want me to have to think about. So, so he kept it light. And they were really reinvigorated, at the end by getting a chance to kind of relive their youth. It was a time when the two of them fell in love, and got married, and they even, in their own small way, had a partner who get this chance to save the world. So it really brought some good memories back. But he started, later in life actually sharing some things with me that he's since gone on to share with others. But I remember it was a day in February, and it was always that. It was a nice cold day, and for some reason I'd gotten up early. And people that know me know that like 9 o'clock is early for me on Saturday, but this particular day I just woke up at 7:30, something like that. And I was kind of just rummaging around the house. I didn't have a mission. I just was awake. Everybody else was asleep, and there's a little knock on the door. Who the heck, normally I'd be in bed and I'd be really angry at somebody doing that. But I opened the door, it's my dad, and he's standing there. And I said, "What are you doing here? You know I don't get up early." He goes, "You did today." I said, "Okay, well, come on in. What do you want?" And he goes, "Well, coffee if you got it." So I got some coffee, and we went and we sat in the dining room, which is a little different, than what we normally did. We sat there, we were drinking coffee, and I said, "So what are you up and about?" And he said, "I woke up this morning, and I remember this was the 50th anniversary of the day I flew my plane into Iwo Jima." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Really?" And he started to talk, and he started to tell me things he hadn't told me before, and he was kind of becoming mission after mission. And the more he got into it, the more he wasn't in my dining room anymore. He was flying his plane. And he got to the point where he mentioned that, he said, and I remember one day we went up, and he said, we shouldn't have gone up. He said the ceiling was around 100 feet. And he said they really didn't think we should be up there flying. But I thought, well, if you don't think we should be up there, the Japanese probably don't believe we're going to be there, and we should be there to keep our heads down. So he took off, and for some reason the ceiling was only low over the island. So he could go out over the ocean and get his bearings and figure out where he wanted to be. And then he came in, ducked down under the clouds. He came in about 50 feet, and he found himself going down a valley. And maybe a little bit like the one talking about in Ezekiel. And there was about 200 Japanese there. And, they saw him, and they knew he was an under observation plane. So some of them actually taunting him were waving and blowing kisses and giving him a hard time. And so that it's kind of personal when you can see people that close. But they knew what type of havoc, he could bring in on them. So they ran up against the cliff because actually there was a Marine group on top of that set of cliffs. And they knew it would be very difficult to try to bring in artillery fire there, so they felt pretty safe. Well, he kind of sat there going back and forth trying to figure out what to do, and then he made a decision that what he was going to do was bring in what they call time fire, which is, us lay people, it's like airburst artillery. So and as you're watching him, he's flying his plane. I mean, he's got his hand on the stick, his feet are moving like the rudder, and he's going kind of point by point, and he starts walking the artillery in until he gets it right where he wants it, and they just cut it loose. And then he just, when he was at that height of it, he just said, while he was still kind of there, he goes, we just slaughtered them, we killed them all, we got them all, every one of them, about 200 of them. And then suddenly he drifted back, and he in our dining room again, and you could just see the shame and the hurt in his eyes, and he just hated it. It was, he just kept saying they were people. He says, I shouldn't have done that. He says, that was horrible. And he said, I ruined a lot of families' lives that day, and he says that things like that should never happen. And of course I went through the litany of, well, there was a war on, it was your job, look at all the people you probably saved on your side. It doesn't matter. He said, doesn't matter, that should happen. So those are things that he carried around with him that a lot of us didn't know about, and I didn't know about until that day. And it's amazing as happy a guy as he was, as much as he had in life, that he had those type of things that he dealt with. And he wasn't alone. There's a whole generation, somebody sitting out there, maybe went through similar things like that. But it's important to know things like that, I think, about a person, that you can still do a lot of good, even after you feel like you maybe have done a lot that really you are very proud of. But he'd always said, whenever he'd hear that thing of Ezekiel, he thought about that valley with the 200 dead soldiers there, and it reminded him of that Ezekiel with the bones, because they were all left over after a big battle from years gone by. And so those type of things really did affect him. He still had nightmares up until the end, from time to time. So you knew that things like that. I guess I'm really proud that he didn't let go of that it really did bother him, and that he cared so much about people and that. On maybe a happier note, the song was real important to me today. I had a difficult time getting through it. I love to sing that song, but I was able to get about half of it down today. And it's the one, Here I Am, Lord. So somebody standing there saying, what are you going to do? I'll do it, God. I'll be there for you. And this came out of a conversation I had with him about 10 or 15 years ago. And some of you know all the different type of things he was involved in the community, whether it was Boy Scouts when I wasn't even old enough to be in it, and senior youth group when I was in elementary school we ran, and they organized things like the city council and the school board, being president of the school board, all sorts of things. It was like every night when I was being at a meeting. And so I asked him about 10 or 15 years ago, I said, why did you do that? I said, you were into everything. Whatever came along, you were in it. And I said, you were on all the time. And granted, he gave us plenty of time on our own. He always carved out time, so I didn't feel deprived, but it was just, I just wanted to know. Because I just didn't have that overwhelming urge to do the same things that he did. And he just looked at me and he said, it didn't take him long. He responded very quickly. And he said, he says, I've spent a lot of sleepless nights lying in bed wondering why God let me live, and I saw so many people die around me. And he said, and I'd ask God, why'd you do that? Why did you let me live? And you know what? He never answered. He said, so I figured I just better do as much as I possibly can while I'm here so that maybe I'll get it right, and maybe I won't let him down. So that was his explanation, and that's, I'm sure, the honest truth as to why he felt the need to be involved in everything that he was. So, looking back in his life, in my humble opinion, I think he probably made God proud, and thanks for indulging me this afternoon. I appreciate your time, and hope I can indulge you well.
Thanks, Steve. Powerful words. Our second Old Testament reading comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. The prophet says, have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and he strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and grow weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not grow faint.
Say to the Lord, my refuge, my rock, in whom I trust, and He will raise you up on eagle's wings. Bear you on the breath of dawn, make you shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of His hand. The snare of the fowler will never capture you, and famine will bring you no fear. Under His wings you refuge, His faithfulness you shield, and He will raise you up on eagle's wings. Bear you on the breath of dawn, make you shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of His hand. You need not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by the day. Though thousands fall about you, near you it shall not come. For to His angels He's given a command to guard you in all of your ways. Upon their hands they'll bear you up, lest you dash your foot against the stone, and He will raise you up on eagle's wings. There you are, the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of His hand.
What a guy. It's a bittersweet honor to be recalled again to speak in particularly such a short time, but things work, I think, the way they're supposed to. I'm a relative newcomer, 5 years, basically, as a result of the airplane, as Steve alluded to, and my experiences were very similar in terms of Mert's recollection of World War II, and I was left with very much the same impression of how peace-loving a man is that experiences that. Mert and I talked one time about combat, and he brought it up, I never did. We talked about the flying aspects of things, and by way of a vignette for you to understand, those of you that aren't familiar really with what he did, picture a plywood and canvas golf cart with wings. Picture flying at just about the altitude of the top of this church, over 23,000 guys that want to kill you, that are every bit as vicious as the ISIS thing we're seeing in the Middle East right now. And then picture somehow putting that in a shoebox and living your life in such an exemplary fashion it's mind boggling, isn't it? You know? And we talk about, we have the boilerplate of the greatest generation and all that, but it really is impressive. And they left us a very high bar to strive for. It was really fun and a great honor for me to almost be considered one of the squadron mates by Mert, because he really, I approached it from a very operational standpoint, of course, working on the airplane, and as Steve mentioned, that was a really vibrant, focused, part of your life, your mid-20s, and you're going through all that stuff, and we had a lot of fun. But he came to me one time and said, this is good, and it's bad kind of at the same time, and I spent, as the airplane received all these awards, it was on the cover of the magazine, we're doing all these articles, he pulled me aside one time, he said, do me a favor, would you? I said, yeah, of course. He said, keep him away from the hot stuff. I don't want to talk about that. And we did. We successfully just, talked about that brotherhood that he shared with those guys that I feel that somehow I didn't deserve it, but I was included among those guys. I also, it's been truly one of the most wonderful chapters of my life, and words can't describe it. I have always been able to stay over at their house, and Steve very graciously said, hey, you want your room back over there? Yeah, sure. And it's, I'm 58 years old. Getting to feel like you're 12 again is really hard to do. It's probably like 1968, what do you think? It's kind of sort of frozen in time, 68, 71, somewhere in there. And I steeped in that over, particularly last evening. I was just thinking, wow, I mean, the end of an era, and I will miss them dearly. And I swear I heard Mert kind of go, hey, just tell him I had a date with Gene.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's great. We've been sitting for a little bit. I'm going to invite you to stand. Our New Testament reading comes from the Apostle Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, chapter 4, verse 16 through 5:1. Paul says, and so we do not lose heart. Even though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure, because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent that we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal. You may be seated. Experience the reading of God's word. Well, as has been said in 1,000 words, but not quite these words, we are here this afternoon to honor a great man. To me, Mert Hansen represented everything that Tom Brokaw discussed so well in his book, The Greatest Generation. And I'm going to, if you'll allow me, if you'll indulge me, I want to read a section from that book. And as you go through that, you'll just check off item after item that describes Mert and Gene. Says Brokaw, these men and women came of age in the Great Depression, when economic despair hovered over the land like a plague. They had watched their parents lose their businesses, their farms, their jobs, their hopes. They had learned to accept a future that played out one day at a time. Then, just as there was a glimmer of economic recovery, war exploded over Europe and Asia. They answered the call to save the world from the two most powerful and ruthless military machines ever assembled, instruments of conquest in the hands of fascist maniacs. They faced great odds and a late start, but they did not protest. At a time in their lives and when their days and nights should have been filled with innocent adventure, love, and the lessons of the workaday world, they were fighting, often hand in hand in the most primitive conditions possible, across the bloodied landscape of France, Belgium, Italy, and Austria. They fought their ways up a necklace of the South Pacific Islands that few had ever heard of before and made them a fixed part of American history. Islands with the names like Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, and Okinawa. They were in the air every day in skies filled with terror, and they went to sea on hostile waters, far removed from the shores of their homeland. When the war was over, the men and the women who had been involved in uniforms and in civilian capacities joined a joyous and short-lived celebration. Then they immediately began the task of rebuilding their lives and the world that they wanted. They were mature beyond their years, tempered by what they had been through, disciplined by their military training and sacrifices. It is a generation that by and large made no demands of homage from those who followed and prospered economically, politically, and culturally because of its sacrifices. It's a generation of towering achievements and modest demeanor. A legacy of their formative years when they were participants in and witnesses to sacrifices of the highest honor. Mert was a great man and a great example of this great generation to which we owe more than we will ever be able to repay. As we reflect upon what made Mert such a great man, we would miss the mark if we did not begin by noting that Mert was a man of great courage. Courage. It's a little known fact that after Mert completed his flight training, he was actually given orders to remain stateside and train other pilots to go to war. Mert confronted his commanding officer and begged him to let him go into action. "I really want to go," he said. And so his CO finally relented. Didn't have to go, but he wanted to. Mert served at Iwo Jima, Guam, and other fields of conflict. He was awarded this Distinguished Flying Cross for his service and would have had a Purple Heart if he wanted it. During one battle, he was hit by some shrapnel, and he was told to go to the field hospital to, quote, "go get his Purple Heart and be stitched back together." He waited there at the field hospital to be attended. And as he was waiting, he saw others in far worse condition than he, some literally holding their guts in with their hands. And as he looked around and waited his turn with the medics, he saw their condition and he got up and he said, "I don't deserve a Purple Heart." And he left. Although Mert was proud of his service to his country and was always moved by the sight of the American flag, Mert never glorified war. In fact, Mert hated war, especially what he called wars of revenge, once saying that, quote, "isn't my kind of living." Like so many other veterans, he came back deeply scarred, and he really only began to talk about his experiences later in his life. It was only then that he began to share with Steve and with Duncan and with others some of the terrifying stories that they have communicated to us. And yet Mert was never defined by those stories, nor stuck reliving those stories. I think, looking back, probably one of his most effective mechanisms for coping with those nightmares and those dreams was his great sense of humor. I remember when I was interviewing with the pastor nominated here at the church, for instance. Towards the end of our time, Mert asked me if there were any other churches that I was interested in interviewing with, if I was talking to other folks, and I reluctantly confessed that I was. And he said, "Well, where are they?" I said, "Well, one of them's in Seattle." "Oh, you don't want to go to Seattle, it rains there all the time." "Got any others?" "Well," he said, "yeah, I'm talking to a church at Cedar Rapids." "Cedar Rapids? They're all stuck up in Cedar Rapids. You don't want to go to Cedar Rapids." And so here I am. And And Mert kept his great sense of humor until the very end. 3 days before he died, for instance, he was eating dinner with Steve. And now the food in the hospital was pretty good, but Mert said it always arrived kind of cold. And as Steve and Mert were talking, Mert picked up a piece of cauliflower and he looked at that thing and he looked at Steve and he said, "Now I'm going to try this, but it'd be a real shame if this is the last thing that I ate before I go to heaven." I hope he got some better food than that. Mert was a great man with great courage and a great sense of humor. He also had a great love for other people. Nowhere was this more evident than in his 69 years of marriage with Jean. The two met on a blind date when Jean had a boring summer job. But out of that inauspicious beginning, a truly wonderful, great love was forged. And of course, that love was freely shared with Steve and with Mona. Somehow, despite all of Mert's extensive community service, Mert always managed to find time for them both, whether that was attending church events or school events, leading 4-H or Boy Scout, coaching Little League Baseball, teaching high school, teaching Sunday school, or helping with the senior high youth group. Mert was just always there for the kids. And probably like a lot of us here, Sunday nights were always spent watching the wonderful world of Disney together. Dad was always in charge of dinner, which was always a fantastic bowl of popcorn. Mert believed in both Steve and Lona, whatever their challenges were. When they lived in Urbandale, for instance, Lona was slated to attend a hospital school because of her disabilities. But Mert and Jean thought that she would be better served by being mainstream, and so that was one of the big reasons that they moved here to Johnston to help out Lona. And if Mert was a success as a parent, he was kind of a superstar as a grandparent. Once when Josh was visiting, for instance, he described the grandpa on Barbie's side as, quote, the best fixer-upper in the world. Realizing quickly that Mert might have felt slighted by this, he quickly added, "And Grandpa, you are the best Oreo twister in the whole world." Pretty high praise. Erin's favorite grandpa story came from when she was 3 years old. "You got a church?" she asked. "I got a dress." But Mert's winning ways, as we've heard, weren't limited to his own children or grandchildren. In fact, Mert was just great with all sorts of kids. He, along with Jean, took a genuine interest in them. Often Steve would come home from one thing or another to find 3 or 4 of his buddies' cars in their driveway. And so he'd come in and he'd see his friends there sitting down with Mert and Jean, and he'd say, "Oh, you came to see me?" "Oh, no, not really. We're just here to visit with Mert, you know." Mert was beloved here at St. Paul Presbyterian, especially our church's Logos program. Teenage girls would flock to him like he was a rock star to get his hugs. I saw it. It's amazing. And just last Sunday, when I told this congregation that it didn't look like Mert was going to make it, there were several teenagers as well as adults who were in tears. And Mert had a great love for the community also. He served on the 2nd city council that Johnston ever had. He was on the school board, served as its president, was a faithful member of the Lions Club, and much, much more. I could go on. Not surprisingly, he was selected as Johnston Citizen of the Year in 1986. Jean would follow him later in this honor, and as far as we know, they're the only couple who has been awarded that award separately, but together, if you know what I mean. Yes. Mert was a great man with great courage and a great sense of humor and a great love for his family and for youth and for the community. Great men leave a great void. And so our loss this morning is great, especially with Jean having just passed away a month ago. I'm sure that I speak for many of us this morning when I say that I just don't know quite whether I'm coming or going today. After Jean's death, I just felt physically and emotionally and spiritually drained. And now Mert's gone. I know that Mert didn't like the passage from Ezekiel 37, but I'm really glad that Steve had us read it. I imagine that a lot of us this afternoon can probably relate to that passage. Like the dry bones of the Israelites, we feel like our spirits have been dried up. Like a part of us has been stolen, perhaps, and our lives are disjointed. A disjointed jungle of emotions, most of them not very positive. I know when I met with Lona and Steve and Barbie on Wednesday night to plan for tonight, they said, I don't know what to feel. I just feel numb. Too many emotions and not enough time to process them. And our church here, our church has lost not only a beloved matriarch, but now a beloved patriarch. A significant part of what's made St. Paul special has been taken from us. And we fear for the future. Only a few of our charter members remain. Time has marched on relentlessly, and we fear the day when we shall be like orphans, alone to face the future without our spiritual ancestors here to hold our hands. What will that mean for us? A great man and a great woman have left a great void in our lives. And so, like the Israelites in exile, we need to hear this afternoon the great promises of our great God. The promise that God has not and will not forget us. That in due time, God will open up also our graves and breathe His Spirit into our troubled hearts, reanimating our withered spirits and reintegrating our dry bones. It's the same promise that the prophet Isaiah made to the same exiles when he proclaims, those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not become weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. So, this afternoon we pray, come Holy Spirit. We hear you calling in the night. Raise us up from our tombs of grief, enabling us to once again soar into God's presence. That's God's promise to us this afternoon, that Spirit will come upon us. It is our hope this afternoon. And it's also God's promise to Mert this afternoon, that the Lord will raise him up also. And this is a promise that we can count on. Because there is one more great in Mert and Peter Hansen's life. Not only did he have great courage and a great sense of humor and a great love for youth and family and for the community, he also had a great faith in God. Although Mert rejected the hellfire damnation that he grew up with, he never rejected his faith in the Lord. No, Merton loved the Lord and expressed it in 1,000 ways, and I so appreciate Steve's story about that. I just figured I had to do as much as I could to make it out, to share. And even though Mert understood all too well Paul's words in 2 Corinthians about our outer nature wasting away, I remember him telling me about how terrible it was when he had some of his attacks and he couldn't get a deep breath of oxygen. Mert also knew that his inner nature was being renewed day by day. Now, I've heard a few people say that without Jean, Mert just kind of gave up and withered. He just couldn't take it. But you know, that wasn't either mine nor the family's experience of this past month. No, Mert didn't give up. His body just happened to give out. And Mert kept fighting the whole way. His faith was always strong. The scriptures tell us that for those who place their faith in God, the valley of the shadow of death is not a permanent destination, but rather simply a place that we pass through on our way to a much better place. A place of peace, as the 23rd Psalm says, like you would experience if you were to lie down in green pastures, and a place of beauty like you would experience if you were sitting beside still waters and looking out over a beautiful river. A house not made with hands, says the Apostle Paul to the Corinthians, eternal in the heavens, as Paul puts it. And so although we grieve this afternoon, we don't fear any evil, neither for ourselves nor for Mert. I understand that when Mert was only 10 years old, he saw his first airplane. And at that very moment, he said, I want to be a pilot. I want to fly. And I have no doubt that many of Mert's experiences in flight were wonderful, perhaps probably even counteracting so many of the terrible experiences that he had in flight during the war. But friends, I've got news for you. Even as we are speaking, Mert is experiencing a flight that words can't even begin to describe. For he has mounted up with wings like eagles, and he is experiencing life in a fullness of dimension that our time and space-bound brains cannot even begin to fathom. I heard about an airliner that was in a serious storm once. Maybe, Duncan, you can relate to this. It was being buffeted violently by turbulence, and the passengers were deeply alarmed by this. No one was tempted to disobey the "Do not fasten your seatbelt" sign, which should have been flashing in neon colors. But there was no word from the captain over the intercom for some reason, and so one of the flight attendants unbuckled her belt and carefully made her way to the cockpit. There she discovered the pilot at the wheel, working hard to keep the plane stabilized. Seeing the look of concern on the flight attendant's face, he spoke her name calmly and gave her a reassuring smile. Returning to the other passengers, the flight attendant said, I have seen the face of the pilot, and he is smiling. All is well. Mert was a great man, friends, and we can take great comfort in that. But we can take even greater comfort in the knowledge that Mert and all who put their trust in the Lord serve an even greater God. And if Mert could come back to us today, he would tell us, I have seen the face of the pilot, and he is smiling. All is well. Thanks, Peter. Let us pray. Gracious God, how great thou art. Thank you that you have led us to a place of peace and guided us with your grace to a place where we are safe. We thank you that by dying, Christ destroyed the power of death, and by rising from the grave, opened the way to eternal life. Help us to know that because he lives, we shall live also, and that neither death nor life, nor things present, nor things to come, shall be able to separate us from your love in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Before we conclude our service, I know that the family would like me to invite each and every person here to come and to join us in a time of fellowship and lunch in the fellowship hall immediately west of our sanctuary here. The folks in the church have been preparing, and they would be really offended if each of you didn't show up and eat pulled pork with us and so forth. You only are immortal, the creator and maker of us all, O Lord. We are mortal. Formed of the earth, and to earth we shall return. This you ordained when you created us, saying, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Indeed, all of us go down to the dust, and yet even at the grave we make our song, saying, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Give rest, O Christ, to your servant with all of your saints, where there is neither pain, nor sorrow, nor sighing, but only life everlasting. Will you please rise? Holy God, by your creative power, you gave us life, and in your redeeming love, you have given us new life in Christ. So we commend our brother, Mert Hansen, to your merciful care. In the faith of Jesus Christ our Lord, who died and who rose again to save us, and who now lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in the knowledge and in the love of God, and of God's Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, and the blessings of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be upon you this day and forever.